Sorry for the hiatus. I had a baby and a couple other major life events at once, mostly great things, but very time consuming. This synchronicity video will have less visuals than usual because of time constraints, but I'm working hard to get back to the normal schedule and normal videos. Thank you very much for watching and supporting this channel. I'll be back on the normal video every Thursday schedule as soon as possible. Synchronicity happens to everyone, but some synchronicities are just kind of crazy. Crazier than others, let's put it that way. Mark Twain, Einstein, Google's founders Larry Page and Sergei Brin, Émile Deschamps, Beethoven, Abraham Lincoln, Freud, Jung, Titanic passengers, Jordan Peterson, the ancient Egyptians, they all have this in common: fascinating and seemingly impossible synchronicities. And today I'm going to share with you historical accounts of those synchronicities along with many others. From ancient Egypt to ancient Rome and all the way up to mathematical theorems written in blood, spooky synchronicities surrounding the Titanic, Carl Jung's World War I prediction, the idea for Google revealed in a dream, and much, much more. So first things first, what exactly is it? Carl Jung introduced synchronicity to describe circumstances that appear meaningfully related yet lack a causal connection. So you have a dream, let's say, about meeting your dream girl or guy in Target, wearing a green shirt, neon orange shoes, and a purple beanie. Next morning you get up, shrug it off, forget about it. Later that week you go back to Target and there she is, or there he is, wearing a green shirt, neon orange shoes, etc., just like your dream. That's a meaningful coincidence, and one with no causal connection. Synchronicity. So there you have it. Synchronicity is that mysterious event when you experience a meaningful coincidence that was apparently caused by nothing. But let's get even more specific. Jung left us with official criteria, if you're interested. The criteria for synchronicity is as follows. Two or more events seemingly accidental, but not necessarily simultaneous, are called synchronistic if the following conditions are met. 1. Any presumption of a causal relationship between the events is absurd or even inconceivable. 2. The events correspond with one another by a common meaning, often expressed symbolically. And 3. Each pair of synchronistic events contains an internally produced and an externally perceived component. So without further ado, some of these world-shaking moments of synchronicity score, I'd say, roughly an 8 or 9 on the Richter scale of synchronistic events, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. And since we're talking about synchronicity, I thought it would be fitting to kick things off with the king of synchronicity himself, Carl Jung. So this happened when Jung was visiting Freud at his house in Vienna. They were sitting in Freud's study having an invigorating chat about psi phenomena. Freud was annoyingly quite dismissive of Jung's thoughts on the subject and of things like synchronicity in general. And he droned on for a while about basically how misguided he thought Jung's ideas were on the subject. Jung listened politely, growing more and more annoyed, I assume, as the monologue went on, when he felt an abrupt, strange heat building up in his diaphragm. Jung tells us that in that moment, a loud crack shattered the conversation, coming from Freud's bookcase, and they jumped up in alarm. Jung turned to Freud and said, "There, that is an example of so-called catalytic exteriorization phenomena." Freud was second-guessing himself in that moment, as he told Jung in a letter later on. But in that moment, he acted unimpressed, telling Jung it was sheer bosh. "It is not," Jung said. "You are mistaken here, Professor. To prove my point, I now predict that in a moment, there will be another such loud retort." According to both men, this is precisely what happened. Right after Jung said so, there was another loud crack from the bookcase, which they investigated without finding the cause. A legendary case of synchronicity. Our next story comes from Émile Deschamps, who wrote in his memoirs about how he was treated to plum pudding by a stranger called Monsieur de however you say that name, in 1805. A decade later, he was about to dine at a Paris restaurant, and he saw plum pudding on the menu. Thrilled, he tried to order it, but the waiter told him they had already served the last dish to another customer. But that customer, interestingly enough, turned out to be good old de Fontebugru. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1832, Deschamps went out to dinner and found plum pudding on the menu again. He ordered it, remembering his curious past with plum pudding, and told his friends about it. And basically said that everything was perfect except this de Fontebugru was missing. And as soon as the words left his mouth, who might walk in the room but Mr. de Fontebugru, who was now, sadly, senile. Looking for a different address, he had wandered into the wrong building, which just so happened to be Deschamps' plum pudding diner, where he had just ordered plum pudding and told his friends about the plum pudding and the pleasant stranger who had treated him to plum pudding, making this a beautiful, glorious synchronicity. Now here's a quick but interesting side note on Freud. In 1922, Freud was very careful publicly and wary of discussing things like synchronicity. But it was only a few years later when he started coming around to the idea, and by 1933 he even said with confidence, psychoanalysis has prepared the way for the acceptance of such processes as telepathy. Telepathy. I just find it fascinating that Freud actually ended up coming around to the possibility of things like synchronicity and even telepathy. He actually got obsessed with numerology, of all things, for a while as well, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Jung's Superman over the proverbial line when he swan dove the entirety of his being into the dark and confusing pool of astrology. So you have to ask yourself, why would such powerful minds, two veritable geniuses in the field of psychology, go head over heels for numerology and astrology? Well, I think the answer is wrapped up nicely in Aristotle's claim that no great mind ever existed without a touch of madness. Were they a little bit crazy like Sir Isaac Newton and his love affair with alchemy and the occult, or Tesla and his love affair with a pigeon, and his brilliant but madness-touched visions of his inventions, including a death ray, or Nietzsche, who went full-on crazy in his final days? Who knows? Anyways, just a quick side note, thought it was interesting. Moving on to the ancient Egyptians. The exact geographical coordinates of the Great Pyramid of Giza is the same, and I mean exactly the same, as the speed of light. The pyramid coordinates 29.9792458 north. And the speed of light is 29.9792458 meters per second. Interesting. Synchronicity. Now, Mark Twain had a couple of them, actually. The first one is his comet. It was November 30, 1835. Mark Twain was born in Missouri with Halley's Comet barreling through the sky. This comet is near enough to view from the Earth once every 75 years or so. In his 20s, Twain predicted that in his death, the comet would be visible in the sky. He said, "It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." He had a heart attack on April 21st, 1910, only 12 hours after Halley's Comet emerged from the sun. The story kind of reminds me a little bit about the Star of Bethlehem, how that marked the birth of Christ. It's another great story of synchronicity. Mark Twain's second example. He dreamed about his brother's dead body lying in a metal coffin. And just a few weeks after, his brother was killed. In that time, it was very uncommon to be buried in anything but a wooden coffin. But strangely, and without knowing of Twain's dream, a friend of his brother's paid for him to be buried in a regal metal coffin.